But let's start with a serious topic, and obviously it's one that when the news broke, a lot of the listeners started reaching out wanting to hear what you had to say, because it's a name a lot of people first heard from you in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. Joe Koff, former head of Ring of Honor. He had been a vice president and then I believe a senior vice president for Sinclair Broadcasting, just passed away. And obviously you worked with him and you knew him.
Well, and he had cancer. That's, been mentioned, and it had been known by myself and, certain people for a little while now, but he hadn't made a public issue out of it. And I guess it was probably about 6 weeks ago that he decided to stop treatments because he wanted to, they were not going to be successful, and it was diminishing his quality of life to where he couldn't spend time with his family and his grandchildren. I think I was thinking about it in my mind. I think besides Delirious, Hunter Johnston, Joe Koff is the only person I didn't yell at the whole time that I was there with that Ring of Honor period from, I think, 2009 to 12. He was every one of the wrestling fans, if you're an AEW fan especially, but every wrestling fan should be grateful to him, if for nothing else, then he kept Ring of Honor alive a couple of different times. First in, when they bought it originally from Kerry Silken, and then secondly, when he made the decision to sell it to Tony Khan rather than just sell the tape library to the WWE, they wouldn't have picked up anybody's contracts or hired probably, a good portion of the talent or whatever. But he was a tremendous, and I don't want to say this the wrong way, he was a tremendous fan of wrestling. Not that he was a mark or that he was trying to throw money around or whatever, but he was a tremendous supporter of wrestling. And he appreciated the wrestling business, and he always had. And he didn't go crazy, wanted to be involved in it just to be a mark. He was involved in, as we mentioned long ago, the Florida office, the Battle of the Belt specials they did, syndicating those. And it was to the point where Eddie Graham wanted, Eddie may have been dead, but whoever was running the office.
Yeah, Eddie was dead already.
Yeah, they wanted him to continue working for the company and trying to get him TV deals. And he just, he was more established in the career trajectory he was already taken. But so he provided a service for a lot of the guys in the business, in that they had a place to grow and progress and flourish or whatever. And at the same time, he did everything he could. And when I've talked about all the chaos and the misery that whole period cost me, it was never Joe's fault. He's the one that got him to buy it, but even he couldn't get him to spend any amount of money. And, part of they had the overall Sinclair Broadcasting, the bigger vision of buying up all these television stations. And well, Brian, you know more about the business world, but Sinclair Broadcasting had, like, at one point a number of years ago, last time I checked, hundreds of millions of dollars, if not $1 billion in debt, right? They had taken on an incredible amount of debt trying to put together these regional sports networks and buying up all these television stations.
And it fell apart. It's not something that's very easy in this market, in this day and age, to do. If they had tried it 20 years earlier, it would have been a different story. But Sinclair, in an era where less people than ever before watch network TV or local TV, they still own TV stations all over the place.
Well, and when we started, and again, let me go back and start at the beginning. It basically started with when Kerry Silken called me after TNA had decided to let me go. Yeah, after the whole Jeff thing and Dutch was gone, and then Russo had his way for a month till Hogan came in, whatever, that whole bunch of chaos. Kerry had talked to me about coming in and what can you do for it? He was losing money and he loved the thing also. He loved Ring of Honor and wrestling and wanted to keep it going. And I was pissed off, at these other yahoos who were wasting all these opportunities. And I said, Kerry, I'll find you something. I'll figure out a way to get you on television or a sponsor or help some way, talent, whatever. And you know that because we had some conversations in New York. But one of the people that I talked to was Gary Juster, who I'd known from the 80s and Crockett and et cetera. And he came to one of the shows and he said, this is an amazing live atmosphere. I said, how do we get it on television? He said, I know a guy that works for Sinclair Broadcasting in Baltimore because Gary had lived in Baltimore for years before he moved down to Atlanta and had run the Baltimore Civic Center and bought time from Joe Koff that many years ago. So we went, and that's where the talk started with Joe Koff. The idea originally was just to get on those television stations. And the reason why I talked earlier about how many stations they ended up buying at this time, I think they owned was it 55 or 50 something television stations? And they would get to where it was, what did they get up to? Like 130 or 40 something? Am I exaggerating that?
I don't think you're exaggerating. I don't remember the exact number, but I remember it being over 100.
So the idea was that, as they got on more stations, we didn't know they were going to get on that many. It would increase the coverage of Ring of Honor. And Joe got so interested and started talking, and they ended up buying the company outright from Kerry. But the problem was, as we mentioned, they didn't want to spend a lot of money past that. It took a number of years for them to start spending any money on the thing. And, that was my issue. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression sometimes. But also, that was the thing, is that the corporate world always has a problem mixing with wrestling. We've seen that. And Joe was probably the greatest guy that has ever been the conduit between the corporate world and the wrestling people. He was gentlemanly and nice and articulate and smart, and he tried to do the best he could, but that's sometimes those worlds just don't mix. So Joe, I never had an issue with, and he did the best he could in those early years while I was around, and he always did the best he could. But that's his primary position in Sinclair had been that he was the guy who trained, and I don't know whether he oversaw them on an ongoing basis, but the different local sales departments at all the stations, he trained them. He had regular 2-week seminars where they would bring all these people together, and he'd teach them how to sell television and sponsorships and value-added packages and et cetera. And that was another part of the idea for Ring of Honor originally, was not to just suddenly make, tens of millions of dollars with live events, but be a value-added thing for the local television stations. And that's what he was so good at, because he had trained a lot of people in the sales departments. He regularly talked to all the, local sales managers and everything in all these stations. So that was, again, that was part of the original plan. And then we found out later on, Sinclair wasn't going to give us the credit, Ring of Honor credit, for the sponsorship money that the local television station took in conjunction with our live events. We've gone over that many times in Ring of Honor talks. This is not spot for it here, but that, Joe sent me off to a number of stations to talk to the sales departments about how specifically to sell wrestling. And I enjoyed doing that because you could get them excited and go out and motivated. And boom, 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 it made the program more more profitable and more important for the local station if they were getting revenue off of it. But anyway, he was just a nice guy. And I think, like I said, not only were he and Hunter the only two guys I don't think I ever yelled at, but when I cracked up and I had all I can stands, I can't stands no more moment with the whole thing, the only two people I felt like I were letting down, or I was letting down, poor grammar, were Hunter and Joe. I felt bad because Joe had done all he could and got him to buy the thing and was trying as best he could. And Hunter was there left with, a lot of stress on his hands. But so I hated to hear this news.
Another thing about Joe Koff, Jim, is that he is one of the people responsible for All In. And I don't think he ever felt that he and Ring of Honor got the credit they deserve, because everyone pretended like it was just the Bucks and Cody doing a show, not that it was a Ring of Honor production produced by Cody and the Bucks,
But besides that, they were all under contract to him, so he had to let them do the thing to begin with. And then, yes, they used their office infrastructure and the Ticketmaster things, all the details of running a show and their production equipment and or department and etc. It was produced by the talent, but the whole thing basically was pulled off by the Ring of Honor infrastructure.
Who got no credit for it, really, when you think about it. I mean, right, there's a lot of people
who then had a billionaire come along and sign up all of the guys after they, hey, thanks, it's a nice audition tape you made for me.
I think a lot of people that were involved with Ring of Honor behind the scenes for those couple of years there have a good deal of resentment, and for good reason, with some of the people involved with All In who went to AEW, because it was basically they gutted Ring of Honor.
Well, yeah, they basically held the company hostage because Ring of Honor was still small enough to where when they brought their, at the time, audience of a few 100,000 indie fanatics to a company that size, it made an instant difference. And then they held the company hostage to do all of their cartoonishness and build it around them. And then they bailed as soon as they helped them make an audition tape for the billionaire that was going to spend a fucking fortune. But otherwise than that, it was great. Yeah, there are a few people who stayed behind who were like, what the fuck?
But yeah, Joe Koff deserves a lot of credit for All In. And of course, Ring of Honor does, but he was the person in charge.
But anyway,
that's why they owned it. That's why they owned the actual footage until Tony Khan bought Ring of Honor, and Cody said, what the fuck?
But anyway, I hate to hear this news. It's bad news. And Joe Koff has a couple of different places in wrestling history, which I think overall, I think he'd be proud to be included in.